Let's get right into it, because this story only gets wilder the deeper you go. Michael Jackson didn't just sell out stadiums, he triggered mass emotional collapses inside them. We're talking about grown adults being pulled unconscious from crowds, teenagers sobbing before the first note even played, and entire front rows going down like dominoes while the king of pop barely moved a muscle on stage. Today, we're counting down 10 moments where Jackson's fans completely lost it, verified, documented, and in some cases caught on camera for the whole world to witness. Stay with me, because the scale of what happened at these shows genuinely defies belief, and by the end you'll understand why no other pop star in history has been able to match it. Before we jump into the countdown, one quick piece of framing. Michael himself once claimed in his private home movies footage that around 5,000 people fainted at every concert he played. Fans and historians generally treat that figure as classic Michael hyperbole. The man loved a dramatic number. But even the skeptics agree that no other pop star in history has generated the kind of physical, emotional, medically assisted chaos he routinely set off just by walking onto a stage. Compare his shows to anyone else's. Prince, Madonna, Whitney Houston, the Rolling Stones, U2, even modern artists like Beyoncé or Taylor Swift. None of them have touring records that read like ambulance dispatch logs. Michael's do. With that framing in mind, here's the list. Number 1. Bucharest, October 1st, 1992, the dangerous tour stop that became infamous. This is the one most people think of when the words Michael Jackson and fainting appear in the same sentence. Around 70,000 spectators packed the National Stadium in Bucharest, Romania, for a concert that HBO would broadcast 9 days later to the highest cable television rating in the network's history at that point. Michael had sold the film rights for a reported $20 million, the largest sum any concert performer had ever received for a televised show at the time, and the footage that beamed out to the world captured something genuinely unsettling. Variety's coverage of the HBO special noted that throughout the performance, there were endless shots of Romanian fans crying and fainting. Medics worked non-stop along the front barricades, pulling limp bodies over the railing and carrying them to first aid tents. One persistent internet rumor claims 23 people died at this show. USA Today and multiple press archives have definitively debunked that claim. No deaths occurred, but the volume of collapses was real, dramatic, and televised globally. The Romanian context matters too. This was 1992, only 3 years after the fall of dictator Nicolae Ceausescu and the violent revolution that opened the country to the West. For most attendees, a massive Western pop concert of this scale simply didn't exist in their lifetimes. They weren't just seeing Michael Jackson, they were seeing freedom embodied on a stage. That political and emotional backdrop supercharged every scream and collapse in ways most Western audiences couldn't fully appreciate. Number 2. The toaster entrance. Also Bucharest, 1992. This deserves its own spot because the physiological reaction was triggered by Michael doing essentially nothing. The dangerous tour opened with a pyrotechnic stunt the crew nicknamed the Toaster, a hidden platform that catapulted Jackson straight up onto the stage through the floor. Once he landed, wearing his gold armor jacket and dark aviator sunglasses, he then stood completely motionless for roughly a minute and a half, while sparks rained down behind him and the crowd screamed his name. No choreography, no singing, just a pose. Footage from the Bucharest broadcast shows multiple fans in the front section going limp and being lifted away by security during those 90 seconds of stillness. Michael would eventually jerk his head once, remove the shades, and launch into jam. But by then, several people were already being stretchered out. He had made a crowd collapse without moving a finger. Think about that for a second. Most performers spend their entire careers trying to earn that kind of reaction through high-energy choreography. Michael earned it by standing still. Number 3. Wembley Stadium, July 1988. Bad tour. Princess Diana in the front row. Michael played 7 sold-out nights at Wembley during the Bad tour, setting the venue's concert attendance record and earning a place in the Guinness Book of Records. Princess Diana and Prince Charles attended one of the shows, which only cranked the hysteria higher. Eyewitness accounts and BBC coverage from the night described teenagers weeping openly before Jackson even appeared, medics stationed every few meters along the barriers, and dozens of attendees being removed during She's Out of My Life alone, the song where Michael traditionally wept on stage and the crowd wept right back at him in a sort of collective emotional feedback loop. The presence of royalty added an additional layer of surrealism. You had the Princess of Wales and the heir to the British throne watching a 29-year-old pop star from Indiana whip 72,000 people into emotional meltdown. The cultural image of that moment never really left public memory. Number 4. The September 1988 bad tour incident that sent 1,550 people to medics. An Associated Press report from September 12, 1988, carried the headline, 1,550 hurt at Jackson show, referring to injuries and medical treatments logged during a single night of the bad tour's European run. Most were minor: crushed toes, heat exhaustion, dehydration, hyperventilation, and faints from being pressed into the barriers. A smaller number were serious enough for hospital transport. The sheer volume made international news and became one of the earliest official data points showing that a Jackson concert operated at a fundamentally different physical risk level than any other touring act of the decade. To put 1,550 in perspective, that's more people requiring medical attention in one night than most major festivals treat across an entire weekend. Venue safety protocols across Europe were reportedly reviewed and updated after this specific incident. Number 5. Vienna. History World Tour, 1997. The You Are Not Alone onstage collapse. During the History Tour stop in Vienna, a young woman who had been invited onto the stage during the ballad You Are Not Alone collapsed while Michael was singing directly to her. Jackson caught her and gently lowered her to the floor while continuing the song, cradling her like a sleeping child. The moment was captured by the official tour cameras and has been viewed millions of times online since. Fans have debated for decades whether the fainting was genuine or staged as part of the routine. Some insiders suggest the latter. But whatever the truth, the visual of a fan literally losing consciousness in Michael's arms became one of the most iconic crowd reaction clips of his entire career. Even if it was planned, the moment captured a larger truth about how his audiences responded to intimate proximity with him. Staged or not, it reflected something real that happened in countless non-televised moments across his touring career. Number 6. Super Bowl XXVII halftime, January 31st, 1993, Pasadena, California. This wasn't a Jackson concert in the traditional sense, but it deserves inclusion for the scale of what happened. Michael was booked for the Super Bowl halftime show at the Rose Bowl and opened the set with his now trademark stillness routine, rising up through the stage, striking a pose, and holding it for an eternity while 98,000 stadium attendees lost their collective composure. Television cameras caught entire sections of the crowd screaming, weeping, and clutching each other as if they were witnessing something religious. The NFL donated $100,000 to Michael's Heal the World Foundation in lieu of a performance fee, and the halftime show became the first in Super Bowl history to draw higher television ratings than the game itself, establishing the modern tradition of the halftime spectacle. Before Michael, nobody cared who played between quarters. After Michael, halftime was the whole point. Every artist who has performed at the Super Bowl since, from Beyoncé to Prince to Rihanna to Kendrick Lamar, is working inside a framework Michael essentially invented that single afternoon. Number 7. Tokyo, September 1987. The Bad Tour opens with chaos. Michael kicked off the Bad Tour in Tokyo on September 12, 1987, playing 3 shows at Korakuen Stadium. Japanese media described scenes that locals hadn't witnessed since Beatlemania in the 1960s. Thousands of girls lining the airport tarmac when his plane arrived, hotel lobbies overrun, and inside the venue, waves of fans being pulled from the pit throughout the performance. The Japanese Red Cross reportedly stationed dozens of emergency personnel around the arena floor. When Michael performed I Just Can't Stop Loving You, eyewitnesses described an audible wave of sobbing rolling through the crowd. Japan had a particularly intense Michael Jackson fandom throughout the 1980s, in part because his Thriller-era videos dominated Japanese television at a time when Western pop was still relatively exotic on the island. By the time he finally arrived in person for the Bad Tour, demand had compounded for half a decade. Number 8. Moscow, September 15, 1993. Dangerous Tour hits post-Soviet Russia. Jackson became one of the first major Western pop artists to play a full concert in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The show at Luzhniki Stadium drew around 70,000 people, and for many attendees it was their first ever exposure to a Western-style stadium spectacle. Russian state media and international wire services described fans weeping uncontrollably during Heal the World, security struggling to hold back the front barriers, and medics working through the night with cases of heat exhaustion and emotional breakdowns. The cultural weight of the moment, a country emerging from decades of isolation finally seeing the king of pop in person, amplified reactions well beyond what the choreography alone could have produced. Russian journalists at the time described audience members openly crying before the show began, overwhelmed by the simple fact that something they had only seen smuggled on VHS was now happening live in front of them. Number 9. Munich. June 27, 1992. Dangerous Tour opening night. The Dangerous World Tour launched at Munich's Olympic Stadium in front of 72,000 fans. MTV was embedded with the production for what became the Dangerous Diaries miniseries, and backstage footage captured medics bringing in collapsed attendees in a steady stream throughout the night. German press the next day described the opening show as equal parts concert and triage unit. The combination of opening night adrenaline, the debut of the toaster entrance, and Michael performing the Smooth Criminal lean live for the first time with his patented anti-gravity shoes created an atmosphere that overwhelmed even the most prepared security staff. This was also the first concert where Michael performed the reworked Smooth Criminal choreography with his patented shoe and peg mechanism, meaning fans were watching technological stage history being made in real time, another layer of overwhelm on top of the already intense emotional buildup. Number 10. The Jackson 5 era, Madison Square Garden, 1970. To close the list, we have to rewind all the way to Michael's childhood, because the hysteria didn't start with Thriller. It started with a 12-year-old in an afro and a purple fedora. When the Jackson 5 played Madison Square Garden in 1970 at the height of I Want You Back and ABC Mania, Motown's press team and New York police had to coordinate emergency exits specifically because girls were fainting so frequently during young Michael's solos that the front sections essentially emptied themselves every few minutes. Rolling Stone and other outlets covered the tour as the new Beatlemania, which at the time was considered the ultimate comparison a pop act could receive. Michael later said in interviews that watching fans cry and collapse at those early shows was both terrifying and addictive, the moment he realized something unusual was happening whenever he stepped in front of a microphone. That realization would shape every performance decision he made for the next 4 decades. So what do we make of all this? The medical literature has a straightforward explanation for why crowds collapsed at Jackson concerts the way they did. Large venues generate heat, poor air circulation, dense body packing, dehydration, and shared emotional arousal, a combination that reliably produces hyperventilation, vasovagal syncope, and panic reactions in susceptible individuals. Jackson's shows amplified every one of those factors. The music was engineered to be deafeningly loud. His team wanted fans to physically feel the bass pressure in their chests, a design choice that became a hallmark of his live productions. The pacing alternated between explosive dance numbers and devastating ballads, yanking the audience through emotional peaks and valleys for 2 straight hours. And the choreography was designed around moments of extreme stillness followed by sudden movement, which activates the sympathetic nervous system in measurable ways. But the physiology only explains part of it. The other part is something harder to quantify. Call it presence, charisma, or parasocial intensity. Fans didn't just come to hear hits. They came to finally see, in person, the figure they had spent years watching through television screens and album covers. For many, the realization that Michael was real, physically standing in front of them, proved genuinely overwhelming. One fan interviewed by BBC after a Wembley show said she had saved money for 2 years for the ticket and burst into tears the moment the opening pyrotechnics hit because her brain couldn't accept that the moment was actually happening. That's not a medical event. That's something closer to spiritual shock. There's also the question of parasocial attachment, which has become a popular term in recent years but was already operating at maximum intensity with Michael decades before sociologists gave it a name. His fans didn't just admire him, they felt like they knew him personally. Songs like Man in the Mirror, Heal the World, and You Are Not Alone were written with direct emotional address, Michael speaking to the listener rather than about an abstract subject. When concertgoers finally saw the man behind those words in the flesh, the bond they had built privately over years of headphone listening erupted publicly in tears, screams, and collapses. To his credit, Michael's team took crowd safety seriously after the early incidents. Music historians who study Jackson's touring operation have documented that his organization implemented multiple crowd control measures during the Dangerous and History tours, including first aid tents at every show, water distribution along the front barriers, designated medical corridors, and multiple exit points to prevent bottlenecking. That's why, despite the 1-550 injury night in 1988 and the televised Bucharest chaos in 1992, no deaths were ever officially reported at a Jackson show, a record that holds up under fact-checking from USA Today and multiple press archives. Compare that to other major concert tragedies of the era: the Roskilde Festival deaths in 2000, the Astroworld disaster in 2021, the Who concert stampede in Cincinnati in 1979, and Jackson's tour safety record starts to look genuinely remarkable given the sheer volume of medical events his shows generated. Here's the takeaway that puts all 10 of these moments into perspective. Beatlemania had its airport screams. Elvis had his weeping Vegas regulars. One Direction had their fainting teenage pits. But Michael Jackson is the only performer in recorded concert history whose audience would routinely lose consciousness during moments where he was literally doing nothing, just standing there, breathing, wearing sunglasses. That level of pull, that ability to trigger mass physical reactions without a single dance step, is something pop music may never see again. It requires a combination of fame, mystique, showmanship, and audience devotion that may have been unique to one specific artist at one specific cultural moment. The monoculture that made Michael ubiquitous on every radio station, television channel, and magazine cover simultaneously doesn't exist anymore. Today's biggest artists are huge within their niches but fragmented across streaming platforms, social feeds, and algorithmic bubbles. Michael existed inside a genuinely universal media ecosystem, and he dominated it more completely than anyone before or since. These 10 examples are just the documented surface of what actually happened out there in those arenas. Thousands of hours of concert footage still circulate online, and almost every major Jackson show from 1987 onward has at least some visible moment of fan collapse caught on camera. Fan communities have spent decades cataloging these incidents, timestamping them, and debating which performances generated the most extreme reactions. The raw emotional footprint he left behind is unlike anything else in recorded concert history. Whatever your opinion of the man, the footage doesn't lie. Fans cried. Fans screamed. Fans dropped. And Michael, for his part, usually just smiled and kept performing.